So today's talks are really about people and the culture, of course, specific to software engineering. We do a lot of that here at the Times. We invest Beta 620. That's one example. This is where a lot of our projects go up that engineers have built on their own or in response to our tech innovation challenges that we have in the company. That's another.
And then if you look at one of the sites that we operate, we started a program called Made in New York, which celebrates companies that are actually built and coded here in the city. And one of the rules is you have to be 50% or more coded front end and back end here in New York to be included on this list. And if you look at the list on our website, almost every single company on the list is hiring. And that says a lot about how many people are looking for engineers. If you look at what types of people they're looking to hire, they're almost all engineers. So I've seen some people argue that we don't have an engineering problem, that really it's not that big of a deal. But from what I see, there is something of an engineering challenge. And I think part of that is that you take this pool of engineers and you start by taking out the engineers that work in finance and consulting. And then you take out the engineers who are already working at startups or other companies that they like. And then you take out the engineers that don't have the skill sets that you're looking for, and you're left with a very small pool of engineers. And most of the people who are talking to me and asking me for engineers are people who work at startups. And so that offers, I think, a different hurdle a lot of times than people who are working for large companies. Goldman Sachs and Google have a leg up. They have huge recruitment budgets. I've talked to kids from Dartmouth and Tufts and Harvard who say that they don't really think about working for startups because nobody from a startup ever comes to their campus. That the people who they see, especially at a place like Dartmouth, which is kind of remote, are the people from Google, the people from Goldman, and so that's where they end up working. And so what happened? So we came up with core values, things that were important to us, and I think that's a key step in figuring out what questions to ask the people that you're interviewing. Because one of our core values, for instance, was hiring people who are curious. Because I really believe that you need to hire people who are curious if you're going to have people in your organization who are innovative, continually want to learn, and are constantly looking for what they can do to make things better. But asking standard interview questions really didn't get to the heart of whether someone is curious or not. So we started asking questions about what types of books they were reading, what projects they were working on outside of work, what things they liked to do when they were a kid. And a lot of that gave us 1,000 times more insight into whether they were a curious person and whether I was going to get someone on my team who actually fit with what I was looking for in terms of building that culture that was more innovative and more willing to take risks. What happens to a company? Like, why does that startup that was so awesome in the beginning sometimes turn into that company that ended up so awful in the end? And what can large companies do to try to prevent that from happening? And it's something that I call the dumbass effect. So the dumbass effect is there's a guy who goes into the break room and he decides to microwave his bowl of macaroni and cheese and forgets to take the metal fork out and sets the microwave on fire, which sets the kitchen on fire. And so all of a sudden, the way that the company reacts is they don't say, God, that guy's a dumbass, we should probably fire him. They say, no more microwaves, or no more kitchen, or you can't have food here anymore. And companies do that all the time, always overreacting to people doing dumbass things. And when you're old, like Girl Scouts was, you start adding those things up over the years, and all of a sudden there are all of these rules in place that no one can remember why they were there in the first place.
The web is not installed software. It's essentially continuously deployed. It's every time a user visits your site, they're essentially getting a new copy of whatever your software is that you're running. So you just don't have to take a bundled approach to change management. You can actually have a continuous change process in place that works and makes sense and is stable and is actually better for your users than a bundled change process. So we commit daily to trunk. We don't work in branches, and we don't hang out on QA or stage for long periods of time testing things out. So we push it live. Whenever you're sort of taking this continuous change approach, you're going to do all of that along the way. And it actually turns out to be much more effective. So for code reviews, for instance, at Etsy we do code reviews pretty much with each commit. And this is sort of a no decision point action, right? Don't think about it. Don't question if your change is too small. Just do a code review. If your change is that small, it's really not going to take any of your peers' time to take care of it. We're trying to foster a culture of innovation, a culture of experimentation. We've strived very hard to make it easy to get those ideas onto production in some meaningful way, to make sure that that code is seen in the context of production, where it's actually most easily understood. Do you really want the people that you're trying to test to be aware that you're actually trying to test a new feature? And for that, we developed the notion of an experiment. So on Etsy, you can actually go to /experiments, and you can sign up voluntarily for a handful of new experiences on Etsy. Some of them are standalone, like the color browser that we have. This was actually sort of the color browser 2.0, and that's how it ended up an experiment. There was an older one. We wanted people to opt into the new one to try it out for a little while. So the whole point here is, as a management staff, you're trying to make it harder to just sit around and talk about an idea than it is to actually prototype it and put it on the site and say, here, this is what I'm talking about. This is the kind of thing that we're trying to do. The lines between departments and responsibilities of departments is actually still very blurred. And I think this is sort of an attribute of smaller companies where people have to wear many hats that we've managed to hold on to for a bit of a longer and extended period of time. So if you know Etsy, if you've heard people talk about, if you've heard other people talk about Etsy at tech conferences or whatnot, you probably know about DevOps, which is the line that's sort of blurred between development and operations, where developers are pretty engaged in the operations process and vice versa. But it's not the only line that's really blurred at Etsy. We also have a pretty blurred line between design and product management, and between product management and development. And personally, I find those very exciting lines to be blurred.
So we tend to think of ourselves as a very engineering and product-focused culture. And I think this is because this is who Dennis and I are. Dennis is very much a product guy, more of an engineer. And we have a little bit of, he has a little bit of engineering in him, I have a little bit of product in me. So that's the culture that we've started since day one. That's the culture we bring to the company, and that's how we've kind of built a team around it. And hiring has always been a very, very important thing for us. At first, it was just Dennis and me. So for almost the first year of our existence, it was just the two of us doing everything. So from press to design to coding on the iPhone app to coding on the server to you name it, whatever needed to happen kind of went through us. And then the first round of hires, we basically brought on our friends. I mean, who better to bring onto your company than people that you really know? You know their work, you work well with them, you get along with them, they think and are very equally passionate about the product that you're trying to build. So that was really easy. So we brought on Harry and Mike and all of these other guys, both front end and back end, as well as to fill out other parts of the team. Our community manager, Chrysanthi, who I believe was our 9th hire, was someone that we'd known from the New York community for like 3 or 4 years. We'd gone to parties and things like that with her. And then the second round of hires, I guess, are friends of friends. We basically tapped into their networks, you know, their frat buddies and their other smart people that they went to college with or that they know from New York State. And then there was a little bit of a lull in 2010 where it was really, well, we were growing like crazy. There was a lot of like internal kind of challenges in terms of like keeping the service up, dealing with all the inbound requests, both on the customer side and the user side, I should say, as well as brands and everyone else. And then there were a lot of, you know, it's just hiring is a job unto itself. It's almost like a full-time thing that you have to do, but it's very hard to do when you're working on 17 other things. And you know, we kind of got into this period of how do we actually hire better? How do we actually do this? And eventually we actually ended up solving that problem by bringing on our first recruiter. So this didn't happen until a year and a half after we launched. So October of last year was when she finally joined. And then since then we've had 2 other recruiters who help us, one in San Francisco, 2 here in New York.